If you have spent your life trying to get love from a parent that simply couldn't give it to you, this podcast is going to do something for you. In this episode, I am joined by Patrick Teahan, therapist, YouTuber, and someone who definitely knows what it's like to heal from the inside out. We talk about toxic parents, family, estrangement, the importance of group therapy, and why grieving the parent that you never had is a radical act of self-love. This one is a powerful one, and I know many of you will already be huge fans of Patrick, and I'm looking forward to you hearing this episode. Dysfunction is everywhere, in our families, in our cultures, and in our systems. And this is Dysfunctional, the podcast that helps you name the things that most people can't or won't see. Let's call it out, break it down, and maybe even start a bloody revolution. Patrick, I am very, very excited to be here and looking forward to this conversation. So firstly, how are you doing?
Good. The same. We've kind of been mutuals in this wacky world. Yeah.
Yeah. It's one of them where we've been connected from afar in a good way.
Mm-hmm.
So look, I'm really looking forward to what we're going to explore today. But firstly, and this is probably for me more than even the listeners, I'd like to know, who is Patrick and how did you come to be him?
I'm laughing a little bit because questions like that always make me think of a movie called The Breakfast Club. In this from the 80s, where they're all kids who are have messed up in some way and they have detention, and then they have to spend the day writing this essay of who are you?
Yeah. Yeah, we did it at school drama, by the way.
Yeah,
you've just given me a flashback because
yeah.
we did this in drama. Yeah.
Who are you? Who do you think you are? Well, I guess kind of where it all kind of came about is really when I was 19 years old, I got very lucky and I met my therapist, who's now my mentor. She's a woman named Amanda Curtin. And I met her at 19 years old. I was waiting tables. It's funny, I'm writing a book that kind of describes this process of getting into therapy. And I know therapy is complicated for a lot of people. I just got extremely lucky. And my first therapist was an amazing therapist who was talking about family of origin childhood trauma. That's the work that she was doing. That's the work that we're doing now. She has a therapy called RRP, which I teach and also do in my own practice when I was practicing. But anyway, at 19 years old, I ended up kind of in someone's chair, and I started to do work on my family system. And that was really kind of like many people kind of waking up to how bad it was, because so many of us kind of just normalize, oh, that's my mom, that's my dad, my family's wacky, what are you going to do? We're not really labeling it as abuse. Some of us do. I knew that something was wrong, but I didn't know it was okay to name it as that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
So that's really kind of where it started, and how through that process and going through my own work is I became greatly inspired by what this woman was doing. So you sit here every day and you really help people become themselves and do a lot of helping them with their wounds and helping them kind of see that they're a good person. And that just was a really inspiring gig. It was the 20-year-old me was wow, it'd be really cool to do that someday, and how fulfilling as well. It really spoke to me. So I was in a group with her for 3.5 years, and that's what started off. And later through that process came sobriety from drugs and alcohol. And then, this was also in the late 90s. I met her in started working with her in August of 97.
Wow.
So it's funny, all of that work started years before even the .com boom. And that's nearly 15, 20 years before how your work and my work has come up through social media.
Yeah.
So in some ways, when people talk about family estrangement or toxic parents, it's really old hat to me, because that's what we were talking about. And it's in that, in the 90s, in that group, many of us in the group therapy that I was in, we were kind of realizing that we needed to withdraw from our family system in order to heal, because we would just get so sucked back in.
Right.
And so it's
And
like,
that group therapy, sorry to
yeah,
interrupt,
sure.
just because, we're talking a long time ago as well. Are we sitting around in a circle in chairs and you're, yeah?
Every Tuesday, 9:30 a.m. for 3.5 years, 8 people, not including the
Wow.
therapist, in the same
Yeah.
room, doing intimacy work, conflict work, working on our family system, reparenting our inner children. Very, very powerful group, old school group therapy, like intimate in the way, like when you come in and talk about yourself in a self-depreciating way, I tune you out because it's just like my dad, you know,
Yeah.
and having people, it's like kind of a laboratory. It's like a fishbowl, but people, you have to be in a certain place to kind of do that work. And it's not like the first session is just like, I don't like it when you talk to me. It's a
Yeah.
long buildup of safety before people start to kind of do that kind of intimacy work. And that I'm giving it a really, probably not a great summary of what that looks like.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you did that group work that went on for like 3 years, what? And then you found sobriety after that?
I almost got kicked out of that group because I wasn't sober. And part of the
Wow.
requirements was, so I would come in still a little bit hungover on a Tuesday, 9:30 a.m.
Mm.
And then we really had to do some work around that. And then I agreed to go abstinent, and then relapsed, and then I needed to go to AA. And so I almost didn't make it through that group because of,
Wow.
you know, but I was able to be abstinent for 2.5 years because I think that group work was so helpful, but that eventually I needed to look at going into the 12-step route, which is what I did for many, many years.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
you got sober in the rooms in 12-step recovery.
Yes. Right. So went to, so it was essentially like, it was, hey, you're still using this work. Isn't People really need to be sober, and, you can't on one hand heal your stuff while you're still self-medicating in that way. And
Yeah.
then I agreed to just be abstinent, and the group work was a good way for me to supplement it. But then I relapsed, still in that group work, and then it was like, okay, you got to go, or you got to do something different.
Mm.
And then I went to AA, and I'm still a member of AA. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's your sober date?
Uh, I love my sober date. It's August 26, 1999.
Wow.
So the Prince song, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and I like it that it's still like right on that cusp of like I was still in the 90s, just made it by like 3.5 months.
Yeah. So that's
four
yeah. So
months.
that's that's some long-term sobriety there. And
Yeah, this August will be 26 years.
26
Yeah.
years. Yeah.
Which is
Yeah.
wild because people I went to high school with have children who are that age.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
you've been sober that long and you
Hmm.
still use the rooms 12 steps.
Pretty much, not as much as I used to, but it's still there in my life. Yeah.
Yeah. So when did you start becoming who you are now? Like the work that you do now? Maybe
Yeah.
just give us a little bit of a
Yeah.
idea of what you do and how it came about.
Yeah, it was inspired by that group work. I kind of worked odd jobs. I was going to school, and I eventually went to get a master's program for counseling, like an master's in social work. I worked with veterans for a little while. In an inpatient psychiatry hospital. That was wild for like 3 years. And then after that, I started a private practice doing RRP, which is Amanda's work, the relationship recovery process. So I started developing my own groups and doing that work just as I had done with her in the 90s and got supervision from her. And then about like 7 or 8 years into my practice, I was like, oh, it'd be cool if I had a YouTube video from my website.
Right.
And I had this idea about doing a video on how the ACE study, people talk about ACEs quite a lot here in the US, how that ACE study it only looked at extreme versions of trauma at that time. You know what I mean? So I wanted to do a video
Yeah.
that said trauma is also other things. Trauma is also, you don't have to have a parent who is incarcerated, but just having a parent who struggles with depression is enough to affect you. So I did this video and I animated it. I spent about a month on it. I did voiceovers on it, which wasn't really necessary. and it got like 1,000 views in a year, and I was like, that's great, 1,000 views in a year, because I wasn't really wanting much more than that or something like that. I just wanted to embed a YouTube video on my website to help people understand about my work a little bit, or about what childhood trauma is. And then the video got shared somewhere, and then all of a sudden it kind of blew up on YouTube. And I was like, oh, I should do more videos, I guess. So that's where.
So it was the first video blew up.
But only after a year, which is wild. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it's like I had this really very lucky experience that someone shared it on Facebook or Reddit, and it took off. So I would once in a while check back on this video, and at a year I was like, oh wow, it's got 1,000 views. And then 3 months later I was like, 8,000 views? What's, and then another month it's like 20,000 views, and then it just kind of like took off in that way. And it was like, in other words, what I'm trying to say is, like, becoming a YouTuber or on social media was not a planned experience. I was just a private practice childhood trauma therapist, with a nice practice where I was around Boston. And then it kind of took off. And then that was in 2018. And by the time COVID came about, I was like overwhelmed with being able to meet the demands of my practice. On top of doing videos, there was a wait list. People around COVID, people were stuck, but they were taking that opportunity to really work on themselves. So they were interested in doing group work with me when I was practicing at that time. And then it was a luxury problem of like having too much work going on, in a way, like putting out social media content and sharing my ideas, which I was really inspired with, was hard to do, have feet in both worlds in that way.
Yeah.
And then another 3 years later, as I needed to sort of like take a pause from practicing and just focus on making videos and training other therapists and stuff. Yeah.
So that's what you do mainly now then. So the content thing is your main thing now.
Yep. Writing a book, making videos, running a membership, and training other therapists. I really enjoy it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that. Yeah. So YouTube was the first thing then for you.
Yep. Oh,
Right.
there's also research that we're about to publish. I've been this year. There's been two journal publications on childhood trauma assessments that I've done. One is on the toxic family system, and one is about childhood trauma symptoms. So there's been a lot of footwork that has gone into making. In that first YouTube video years ago, I developed a questionnaire, and that questionnaire has now been empirically validated and is now an assessment that was published in a journal called the Journal of Affect Disorders in June of this year. So there's been a lot of clinical stuff in the background as well. We're about to publish this year, hopefully, on like a 4-year research project on how well our group therapy is effective, in terms of, we've been, like in our 6-month group modality, folks have been filling out assessments and tracking their progress. I've always known it's worked, because I've known that since the 90s about the model of therapy, but now it's like the empirical data is there reflecting that it works. So,
are you able to give us an overview of like what that looks like? What the group work looks like? A summary, maybe.
Yeah, RRP, relationship recovery process, is really like a group therapy modality. Some of it can be done in individual, but primarily a group. And there are two types of groups that are typically in the model. One is the 6-month model, is what I came up with, because it's very difficult to have somebody commit to a 3-year process without knowing what happens in that. So I came up with a shorter introduction. And the research has been on that introduction. So in 6 months, it is roughly groups comprised of childhood trauma survivors from family of origin trauma. Not like you had a narcissistic ex who assaulted you in some way. It's really about family of origin trauma, which is kind of unique for a therapy model to only focus on that. That's really like what it is about. It is sort of like growing up in childhood trauma with parents who may be really limited or emotionally immature or toxic. And there's a 6-month model, then there's a 3.5-year model. Many people start with a 6-month and then they go on into a 3-month modality. And again, these groups are comprised of 6 to 8 individuals, and they get sessions dedicated to them to tell their family story, to do experiential therapy. So there's all these very much tool-oriented interventions that happen within that, as well as general group work of learning how to be intimate without having your inner child run you, or people pleasing, or all kinds of stuff. And it's an interesting thing I tell people when they're interested in this group that everyone shows up feeling like they're either too fucked up for a group like this or they're not fucked up enough. So there's an interesting thing there. Like, if, when people go to the rooms, I'm like, am I too much of an alcoholic to be here? Am I not a drinker enough? Kind of a thing. People are inner children. If you're wired, I use that word, I use that language. They're always looking for an out. I'm too messed up, so I don't belong here. I'm not messed up enough, so I don't belong here. And that's a lot of what the group work can be about, is like sticking with it, like, and reclaiming intimacy and working on your family. So I don't know if that helps. And the research is really, in the 6-month group, is really about, there is a clinical assessment called the PCL-5, which is a trauma symptom assessment. And I believe the top scoring, it's not from 0 to 100, but I believe it's around 70 to 80. And most people, when they start the group, they report on an average of scoring around about 45 to 47 as active symptoms. And the clinical cutoff for CPTSD is around 31. And at the beginning of the group, people start around 43, 45, and then it drops down just in 6 months to that clinical cutoff. I'm not saying it's healing, but it really greatly, like, healing everything. You know what I mean? It's only 6 months,
Yeah.
But their self-reported symptoms of active symptoms drop from 43 to 31, with 31 being the cutoff of clinical.
Wow.
So we were really blessed to have that empirical data. We knew it worked, but we didn't really know empirically exactly how the numbers matched up in that way.
Wow.
So it's nice. It's nice to know that it's effective enough and helpful enough that it reduces the symptoms in a short amount of time. And I'm not saying that those symptoms wouldn't come back out of the group or whatever, but it's nice that just in that 6 months, that even, I think, just, and you might relate to this as well, it's just like going into a group of people who understand you really help you become more comfortable in your own skin.
Yeah.
Just that alone is a huge therapeutic factor.
Yeah. Yeah. I think when I think about and look at my own story, and I, like you, I got well in 12 steps, right? I got sober in 12 steps. That was sort of over 13 years ago. And I do think that the group aspect of that allowed me to, I say, almost like grow up and practice who I am. Once you took everything away, I literally was sort of practicing being different versions of myself until I sort of landed somewhere on who I am, right? And so almost like testing out like personas and ways of being, and then shedding those personas until I got back to myself. But one thing's piqued my interest a little bit. I just want to pick you on it a little bit. I think the one thing that I didn't take from 12-step groups fully.
I know what you're going to say.
Do you?
I think I know what you're going to say. It's like they're fantastic, but they can be very keep people trapped in a family system with the language of that. I don't know if that's what you're going to say, but
it's of that. It's of that ilk. So what I was going to say, and I still use them, by the way. I'm like you, so neither of us are doing them down. But it's the intimacy piece for me that I realized was the sticking point. So I felt like I'd done loads of work, and I could be in a room of people and feel like I could be myself and feel like I could be vulnerable in that room. But what I realized maybe in the last few years is that in my personal relationships, so my meaningful personal relationships, was that I couldn't do the intimacy piece. I couldn't I couldn't give somebody that I truly cared about my emotions, or share them with them and trust them to be held. So I was always still playing a bit of an act in that way.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be a mind reader there. I tend to not like it.
No, no,
I
no,
know it's
no. I
this
like
way,
that.
you know.
No, no, but I like it. I like it.
Yeah.
It's good.
But I think it's just I think my only criticism of 12-step stuff is when people, and again, the personalities in that program may not be the total representation of that program. But I heard a
Of
lot
course.
of like people say, "This is all I need. I don't need therapy. This is all
Yeah.
I need. This is the way. This is the path." And there can be bypassing in there that, like, like lots of folks need outside help to learn how to be really authentic and intimate with somebody that you may not totally get in that program.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that for people listening as well, okay, in fact, let me ask you to do it. For
Hmm.
people listening, when you talk about emotional intimacy, because I think a lot of people hear that and they just think it means how I kiss and cuddle my partner, right?
Yeah.
Do I feel safe to do that? I think people hear intimacy and that's what they think, right?
Yeah.
So when we're talking about emotional intimacy in that way, can you explain what you mean when you say that?
It's a great question. It's like a skill set that many people in an intimate, let's just say for the intimacy, I think about it in terms of all kinds of intimacy. There's the intimacy we have with ourselves. Are we being honest with ourselves? Are we being able to be a good parent for ourselves? Are we taking ourselves seriously? All kinds of intimacy in that way. Intimacy socially in groups, everything from like roommates to coworkers. But romantic intimacy is, I think, where most of our stuff comes up with another person. And I think it's almost like to learn a skill set to be able to, many people get caught up in, there's a little bit of tension about how we left each other in the morning or whatever. And then we just let it go and don't talk about it. And then there's a pattern. Do you know what I mean? Or maybe there's a bit of like sort of sexual problems or sexual differences. Just people, especially those who come from dysfunctional family systems, we tend to just deal with our feelings the way we always have, is just not talk about it, not go there, that kind of a thing. So when I think about intimacy is I think the final frontier of real growth and development for couples, especially about being able to say, babe, when you get frustrated and you tell me it's fine, I lose you for about 2 days. And I really
Mm,
want to talk about it. But what I just said is a skill set. You have to be willing to go there. You have to be willing to go there and check your own stuff, to not be either people pleasy or rageful or whatever. For people to be able to, like, in a laboratory way. So when you feel like I'm not connected with you, what happens?
mm,
You know, and like that's a very intimate. It takes a lot of people need that from a couples therapist to learn that. But the other problem, what I find the most top tier problem, is one person is working on themselves in a couplehood, and the other person is totally not interested. So
mm.
if you and I were like part of a couple, and you were totally shut down and you're just operating in what your family taught you to just like keep the ship going no matter what and not address anything. And I'm super into reading the self-help books and doing this and learning the things or whatever. That's a huge disconnect.
How do you deal with that? Can you deal with that?
Such everything from the Gottman method. The Gottmans talk about this, and like some other therapists have tried to. It's a problem that people are trying to do their best with, I think. But my feeling is like I learned this from my mentor Amanda Curtin. Is I don't think it's good for people to keep trying with someone when they have nothing to work with.
Mm,
Like they might really love them, their partner might not be nice, but their partner might. It's just too much like childhood to be left holding the bag, having no real connection. That you're just, it's really sad and lonely. It's really worse when we really love somebody and they're not willing to look at themselves or do that kind of a thing. So it's tough. It can be really, really tough. And that for the childhood trauma survivor, it might be really, I think it's important for everybody, but I think for them, it might be more important to have real authentic conversations because it's like they're malnourished for it,
mm,
you know? So
yeah.
we, it's just you. There's a whole bunch of patterns to this stuff. Like, I don't know about you, but I've had many before I met my wife. I've had many dysfunctional relationships where I was trying to caretake or trying to you know what I mean? Trying to get something that the person wasn't interested in, and that's not how their mind work, or all of that, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Is that do you feel like that's as a therapist, do you feel like that's quite a controversial opinion? Just because I heard I was listening to a podcast, I forget the chap who it was, but it was the first time I'd ever heard somebody like a therapist say it, and he said if one person is not into that stuff, exactly as you described, right? If one
Yeah.
person's just not and it's never gonna be, he's like, I won't work with them. I'll just tell them that there's nowhere to go.
In the same way, if when I was practicing, if people wanted to see me for couples work,
Mm,
eventually I started to get to a place of like, it's usually one person making the call. And then one person, they would say, I really want to come to couples work, but my partner doesn't believe that they have childhood trauma, or even I have childhood trauma. And I might say, I'm probably not your person,
mm,
because I require anybody who would, when I was practicing, eventually in my last 5 years of practice, I started to kind of wise up in a way. Instead of wasting their time, and instead of wasting my own time, I would say, I I work on family systems, childhood trauma, and it's, you know what I mean? If you don't feel like you
yeah.
have that going on, I don't want to spend months trying to convince you that you do, because that's not good for either of us.
Mm,
So if an individual sort of said, the worst kind of call I would get is when someone would say, and I get it, I'm not trying to demonize anybody or whatever, but I just don't see the how it's helpful. I would get calls that were like, my partner thinks I have issues, and they said I should talk to you. You know what I mean? Like, where
yeah.
like then eventually I don't really know how invested that person is, and they're that, you know what I mean? I
Yeah.
eventually needed people to say, my father was really emotionally off, and my mother was really shut down, and there was a lot of crazy stuff that we went through, and I don't know how to talk about it. They know in some way. The same way with a couple is, um, for my partner doesn't think that there's a problem, or they think that I'm the problem by keep talking about this stuff. I may not be making sense, but to that therapist that you mentioned, I too started to develop really strong boundaries around, this is the way I work, and it's going to be more helpful for people to know what their problem is, and they have to agree that there is a problem. And the way that I specifically work is, they have to have some kind of knowledge that it potentially involves their childhood,
Yeah.
because otherwise, if I wouldn't try to convince you for like 3 hours that, you know what I mean, like it's just,
Yeah.
then it's almost like I'm trying to get you into a cult.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
a good time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So when did the because you talk specifically, and we're going to talk about this. Let's go there now.
Sure.
The word toxic, right? So you speak specifically on Instagram is where I see you.
Hmm.
Okay,
Yep.
that's where I sort of like have seen your content and stuff. And you talk specifically about toxic parents. That's the terminology that you use, right?
Yep.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yep.
Um, did you purposely land at that place of using that terminology? Is there a reason behind it? How did that sort of come about?
I don't really quite know how it came about. It was, it was even before the social media stuff, just in the way I spoke with clients. Do you know what I mean? Before
Yeah.
any of that kind of came up, in a way that, you know, I would say 99% of the people that came to see me, as well as all of my group members when I was in a group myself, we
Mm,
would all have parents that qualified under the realm of toxicity, you know.
yeah.
And it is an interesting thing because, once in a while, rarely I would have a client that, I see toxicity as old school. There's an old school psych term called having problems of character.
Okay.
And you may have heard that in AA, kind of a thing, like sort of character flaws, character defects. But
Defects. Yeah.
problems of character in the psych world, I think, used to be kind of old school code for, the person might be struggling with a personality disorder.
Mm-hmm.
They may be struggling with borderline personality disorder, or an antisocial piece, or a narcissism piece, or there's something very antagonistic in the way that this person operates relationally.
Mm-hmm.
So when I use that term, I tend to think about, a parent struggling with major character flaws. And I'm not trying to say like they are willingly having those things. That comes from their own childhood trauma, can come from organic mental health stuff, all kinds of things. But when I'm describing that word, I'm usually describing a parent who is antagonistic, crazy making, very poor boundaries. So in a way, like if someone would come to me and say, I think I have childhood trauma, and what you discuss in your videos, like I think my mom has that going on. I'm like, well, how does your mom behave? And they might say, at my wedding, they made a scene because they felt like they threw a table because they felt like the caterer was kind of doing something sneaky. They talked to my mother-in-law, who they've never met before, about how my husband, her son, might be a perpetrator. Do you know what I mean? Just like a
Yeah.
very intrusive, a very emotionally immature type of parent. So when I mean the word, I'm usually literally using it in a literal sense, that the effects of that parent's behavior has a greatly damaging piece to it, And another piece too is like the level of toxicity is that I find that a toxic parent is one who interprets accountability as an insult.
Give me more on that. Yeah.
Like to say if another, dad, when you went through the divorce and you dated all these women and you introduced all these women very in a quick way in my life, there was a woman who you dated for 3 months that I loved, but then she just went away. There was another woman that you brought in, that you started dating, that was highly physically abusive to me when you weren't around. And then when that child is bringing that up, the toxic parent is like, how dare you bring that up with me? I was going through so much at that point. That they interpret the bringing it up as a personal affront to them.
Yeah.
It's insulting to them, and
Yeah.
I'm dialing in my own mother in that way, because it's sort of like my mother's an alcoholic, and I think that if my mom were to get sober, there may be that character flawed piece underneath that. It's kind of hard, you know what I mean, to just like. But in AA, I've seen people come in really character flawed personality stuff. They get sober, and then there's more of a not toxic person underneath that. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
It does. Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
you can't, but I do. My gut tells me it doesn't really matter. My mom is not sober. She's a greatly toxic person because of that. So I'm dialing in my own mother when if I were to, Mom, when you would drink and drive around us, and the men that you brought into our lives, and the reactions that you would have with me when I would need something from you, is my mom takes that as a personal insult as opposed to looking at the behavior.
Yeah.
And that's where I think a lot of people get tripped up around. Do you know what I mean? Because when a child that's gone through childhood trauma is when people want to have those conversations, they're looking for connection and repair, but the parent is interpreting it as an attack. So that is a little bit of a tip off for me. And to be fair, I think anybody would be a little bit maybe defensive.
Yeah.
If my son, who's 14, if he came to me in 15 years and said, I've been in therapy, and I just like, I want to talk to you about the ways that you would joke around about stuff and that kind of a thing, I'm going to be a little bit defensive. But me being me, I have to look at, or the better way to put it is like, I still know that I'm a good person, and I still know that I have a good relationship with my son, that we can talk about it. Not like it's a, how dare you?
Yeah.
You had everything under the sun from me.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like we were in Boy Scouts together. I can't believe you're betraying me like this.
Yeah.
That's a very dramatic response. I don't know if I'm making sense there, but
You're making perfect sense, and I think it's where I've landed with it, right? Because you often get this question, like one of the sort of passive aggressive comments I'm sure that you've received many a time on social media is, it's maybe not, doesn't sound passive aggressive in itself, but when people say define toxic parent, I sometimes can tell you're saying that because you don't think I'm going to be able to define it, right? And I do think that the place that I've landed with it is that accountability piece, right? And like you said,
yeah,
if my kids come to me, I might be defensive. I might even be defensive. I might even say, you know, the typical sort of like, after everything I've done for you, right? I've posted about that before online and people go, everybody says that. And I think, well, I might say that as a knee-jerk reaction when I'm being defensive, but my kids will know, and I know that very, very quickly I'll be going back and saying, sorry, you caught me, you caught me in a moment. What I said was wrong, and it's
Yeah.
not that, I was being defensive, and let's talk about it. I think the biggest sort of definer of that toxic to me is not only when they won't accept it and they call it betrayal, but they are willing to make you the problem for citing it, where they will then double down on, well, the only reason I brought the abusive people into your life is because I was in so much distress because you were such a terrible child.
Yeah, or it wasn't my fault that I dated all those unsafe women. I wouldn't have been there if your mother hadn't divorced me.
Yeah.
Like
So they give it to someone else,
like a
even. Yeah.
passing of the buck kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So that's where we're really kind of getting into, that could come from a mental health illness, a pathology. That can come from the person's own childhood trauma. That maybe that dad, that fictitious dad who dated these women, maybe he has a horrid childhood trauma history where he was named as a scapegoat.
Mm-hmm.
And now as an adult, he has no work. He's not working on himself in any way, and he's still defensive. It's almost like his messages, and a lot of estranged parents, you're never going to get me. You're never going to get me to nail down that I'm a bad person. And generational trauma, there's all kinds of stuff in there, which is it's really sad and unfortunate, because I in the zeitgeist of all this stuff, there is really like team A of adult children who have been abused by parents, team B, the estranged parents who tend to, like, they might want to double down. Like, you're never gonna, there's even books out there that are very much just like, sort of like, give up on your kids, so there's a big disconnect between these two worlds.
Yeah.
And I recently did a YouTube video on this, about just sort of for estranged parents, to give them some insight about this kind of stuff. And I'm not sure, I don't want to be all team A and say every parent is an a-hole parent out there no matter what, even though that's how people interpret you and I.
Yeah.
Like, there is no perfect parent. I believe that, but we're not talking about that. Do you know what I mean? We're not really talking about that. I would say, what is a non-toxic version of a parent? Let's just say the person had childhood trauma. Let's just say they really did their best, but with their child, for the first 2 decades of that child's life, they were really shut down and depressed and had very little energy.
Mm-hmm.
And if not, we're really dismissive and not present. And because of their depression, because of their trauma, that's very different than someone who's in your face, crossing boundaries, and I'm going to get you kind of a parent.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a very different type of thing, but it really comes down to, back to team A, team B, is what's really sad about it is there would be so much bridging and healing, I find, if on the parent side, because that's where a lot of the responsibility lies, because they were driving the bus at the time. I think there would be so much more open conversations and better work if the person can handle it, about simply not being so defensive as you described, not being so defensive, not being doubling down, not going to that place of, how dare you, I helped you get into college. It's a transactional attitude. You know what I mean? You shouldn't be upset about the women I brought into your life, because I helped you get into college and I sat down with you. Transactional. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's like, that doesn't, the person's still left with like, yeah, but that stepmom that I had in my life used to like lock me in a closet and hit me when you weren't here. There's still, what are we doing with that? And then there's more. So there'd be a lot more connection. There'd be a lot more reconciliation and repair without that. And unfortunately, it may not seem fair in what I'm describing, because it is on the parent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but it is on the parent. What would you do? You know, if you were a therapist and in practice, right? Still, you know,
Hmm.
you've got someone who's come to you, and they've got a parent like you've just described. They're not giving anything. All right, but
Yep.
they're saying to you, "I want to heal, but I want to have a relationship still with my parent. It's breaking me."
And what is the attitude of if it was like family therapy, what's the attitude of the parent?
Yeah, they've come to you. Yeah, family therapy. Like
Hmm.
no, they've come to you for individual therapy, right? I'm really struggling in my life, and you've got to the point where you realize that so much of this is coming from this relationship with their parent, right? Where do you go with that? Is that might be too broad a question?
Yeah, well, I get that's was most of like they would come in, and sometimes the parent would be deceased, sometimes they're living very far away from the parent, sometimes they've already gone somewhat no contact. But for those that come in that are really still struggling with it, um, I don't really usually, and this might come across as me having bias, but I would usually suss out how open and healthy might that parent be from
Mm-hmm.
the client. And in a way, because of the stuff that I do, like if the client comes in and they're sort of saying, I tried to talk to my mom about it, but she threw a plate at my head.
Mm-hmm.
I'm probably not going to suggest family therapy. Do you know what I mean? Like, or
Mm-hmm.
I taught to talk to my mom, or I do suggest family therapy if the client is able to tell me that that parent is maybe in Codependence Anonymous, or they go to therapy themselves, or they're working on some kind of path. But it really depends. I have suggested family therapy when it seems like from the client that they would benefit from that. But I tend to really only suggest family therapy because it's therapists are in a weird position in a way of like, let's just say someone who was profoundly toxic, and to suggest family therapy, we're not miracle workers. Like, I
Mm.
can't get someone who's massively shame based and defensive and they might have some mental health stuff going on to see their part in things, because I don't think therapy should be about those power struggles.
Yeah.
I don't think it's really that effective. Or maybe I'm not that good or something like that. I'm not trying to be facetious there, but I'm sure that there's family therapists who can do that. But the same way, if it was couples therapy, in a way that if I don't have anything to go work, if I don't have anything to work with your mom or your partner, why do you may not have anything to work with? And I don't mean to sound nihilistic or defeatist in that way, but like the general public can get caught up in like, man, I would just love to send my dad to therapy and have my dad see Patrick. And you know what I mean? Like, I'm not like a warrant officer. Do you know what I mean? I'm not like,
Yeah.
I'm not, and I don't mean to be facetious towards dads or anybody, like, why do people think we can kind of get through to some people who aren't working on a path anyway? Does that make sense? It's a
It
bit
does make
tricky.
yeah, it does make sense.
Or
Yeah.
trying to get through to an alcoholic who's not ready,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah. That was sort of because my dad was an alcoholic, right? And then I originally started supporting children affected by parents drinking through a charity here in the UK, the NACOA, which is for children of alcoholics. And
Mm-hmm.
um, it was funny because when I first found them, I was coming as like the guy who was in recovery. I was in early recovery, and I was like, all for the alcoholic. And I was going into this charity to be like, yeah, I can help all the kids understand that we've got an illness and that we can
Yeah.
get better and all of that kind of stuff. And then very quickly I learned with the charity, and then opening up to my own experience that I would previously been kind of asleep to, I started to realize that it's not that cut and dry, right? Do you know, it's not
Mm-hmm.
if the parent is not engaging in any kind of service or any attempt to help themselves, then actually you need to treat the person that's struggling as a result of that on a more of an individual basis. How do you empower them to have the best possible life in spite of what they're experiencing at the hands of their parent? And that was a real that's when I realized there was a big sticking point in
Yeah.
the public's way of seeing stuff, because I started doing like media stuff here, and you'd often get asked, you'd go, you'd be on, and they'd be like, oh, we've got, an adult child here, and they're saying, how do they best support their mum or their dad who's the alcoholic. And when you give the answer of they best support them by supporting themselves, and if that means, you know, minimizing the contact they have with them to and mirror healthy boundaries, and you could, I start to see that is not the answer people want. The general sort of public want, right? They don't want that answer. And
Yeah, it's very, very yeah, very wise what you just said. Because,
yeah,
I think people can be in desperate situations. Like, I don't mean to sound cold, but if I had a client, and I've had clients who say they describe the behavior of their parent, and that seems highly either toxic or immature, or abusive, like all of it. Um, they they don't. If they were to say, "Can I bring in my mom or my dad and have them talk?" They're asking for family therapy from me, but they've also described the parent not being in a place to work on themselves in any way, shape, or form. You
yeah,
know, I tend to just gently kind of say no, but they're almost looking to the helpers for some miscellaneous great resource that'll make it okay. So in other words,
yeah,
if a child, a 15-year-old has an alcoholic parent, and you're suggesting the best way to do it is maybe take care of yourself and protect yourself and support yourself in the best way, they're not, it's kind of heartbreaking because that 50-year-old might be like, no, I don't want that. I want strategies on how to help my dad not drink.
yeah,
I want strategy. How do you, I don't, you know what I mean? I want to know how do I get my mom to be happy so she doesn't have to drink anymore? And
yeah,
that's a really heartbreaking place to be, because I've had the similar thing in the childhood trauma realm. They're like, oh, I would still love to be, I think you could get through to my mom. Me knowing that if I were to bring that parent into that session, based upon how that parent already behaves and what they have said to the child and whatever, and I probably wouldn't even feel safe with the parent around them. And I know that that sounds like cold and biased and whatever, but to bring them into family therapy is that, like bringing the alcoholic who wasn't ready yet, you're going to get a lot of defensiveness. You're going to, I think what estranged parents want from family therapy, and that I'm generalizing, is they want the therapist to sign off on that they did their best.
yeah,
And they don't have the right, the child does not have the right, and the child is being overly persnickety or overly sensitive about the things, such as bringing all the, in that hypothetical about bringing unsafe women into the after the divorce and all that kind of a thing. Like,
yeah,
I know that that's really kind of what I've also heard from those who do family therapy. Family therapy can be very effective, and there are some estrangement coaches that are working with parents to try to get them to sort of say, well, it's best to not say that.
yeah,
If you want to have a relationship with your child, it's best to not maybe start with, I was doing my best and it's all your father's fault. That's probably not
yeah.
going to help your child have a process.
Do you feel like I'm going to be a bit controversial here, so I don't know if you'll be able to answer the question, but
Mm-hmm.
I think there is a difference between somebody who's like, let's say, really emotionally immature, so as a result is like has a lot of sort of toxic tendencies, and then I feel like there is another person, a type of person who is like slightly different, and like I almost feel like you'll never reach. And I feel like I can almost pick up when I'm around somebody who is like so far gone, so like just I would say toxic, right? If I was using that, just so toxic that you'll never get near them.
Are they behaviorally toxic, or just they're so shut down, and or like, I guess, can you personify that a little bit for me? Like, what's the
So I
difference?
they so because I call people, I say, you know, you get toxic people, yeah. I mean the way that they behave, it's in their way, it's like they are, their whole being has become toxic, you know. I feel
Mm-hmm.
like there's like, I meet some people and I'm like, cool, this is not a very nice person, but I feel like you could probably get some empathy and compassion out of them somewhere. And then I feel like there's this other category of person who is just completely like, they embody toxicity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't. There's, you never know with people. Do you know what I mean? I
Hmm.
find like it really. I will say this. This is. I often think about in my first couple of years of sobriety. There was a guy that I loved so much, a guy named John. This guy is still and anonymous, and he came in. I would. He freaked me out. He was just so angry looking. He would look so
Yeah.
miserable. Do you know what I mean? I think like he was just, you know what I mean? Might just tell someone to F off and then leave the room and then maybe come back. Like me, he hated being there in those initial stages. It
Yeah.
wasn't a good time. You know, like
Yeah.
no one goes to a church basement full of
Yeah.
strangers, you know, like,
Yeah.
oh, this is going to be awesome. But John was in rough shape. Um, but John became the most lovable, safe man I've ever met in my life. In
Yeah.
that, so some people I think can change, and that's not. I'm not just talking about alcoholism.
Yeah.
You know, there's just some people that toxic masculinity. You and I both know men who have been, and maybe even ourselves, who have been engaged in a little bit of that stuff,
Oh, I definitely was. When I
and
was
then
drinking, you're 100%, yeah.
you know what I mean? Like it's just we outgrow that. You know, I think it really comes down to whether the person has the capacity to to grow and have insight. And I think what the litmus is like, I think that the difference is the big thing is like eventually you and I started to learn that we have an impact on other people.
Yeah.
Like, holy shit, maybe people tend to view me as really intense and negative. Oh, you know what I mean? Like there's
Yeah.
that mechanism of insight or whatever of, and again, coming back to the estranged parent is they're so defensive. They're not interested in knowing how they impact their children
Yeah.
because they only hear, I don't care that you helped me with college. I don't care that you helped me and fed me. I just am pissed off that you were in a bad mood most days.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And they just
Yeah.
hear it a certain way. But if they were to be thinking about how that would impact a 10-year-old to have
Yeah.
those daily fights in the house, or if a child comes like, you know, like, I love you both, but you guys screamed at each other every day for the last 30 years and you still do. And
Yeah.
it's like, what's it to you?
Yeah.
You know, they're not interested in how they impact them.
Yeah.
So I think that, and there are just definitely some people who are, well, you know, it's really kind of sad. There was a really amazing book called No One Is to Blame by a guy named Bob Hoffman.
Mm.
And he had a trauma center out in San Francisco, I think in the 90s and the 80s. And this book is like hard to get a hold of. I loved it. But his model was in one chapter, you put a toxic parent or an abusive parent in an empty chair and you really let them have it, or you rip apart a pillow, you get some kind of release going or something like that, and you really tell the truth to the parent. And then in a reverse way, for me, this is too fast, is like reverse ways. You start to, the next chapter is you have a conversation with, imagine having a conversation with that toxic parent when they were a child to get going on compassion and to really kind
Mm.
of see them. And in that, he says, which I'll never forget in that chapter, he said something like, many people, or even most people, they will pass away and leave this world without knowing their inner child, nor knowing how they impact others.
Yeah.
That was like,
Yeah.
whoa. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's just in a
Yeah.
way, like that really spelled it out for me. And I have it's kind of sad. I'm not trying to, I don't mean this from an entitled place or an elitist place, but folks like my mom will most likely maybe leave this world without ever really knowing themselves
Yeah.
or knowing the impact that they have on themselves, on others, on people around them, because they're just caught up in like what maybe the Buddhists would call the pain body. They're
Mm.
just caught up in that like mind based, you're against me, you're with me, you're against me, what's happening? That, you know, it's kind of really sad that some people live in that perpetually. I feel blessed I was able to kind of get out of it through help,
Yeah.
but there might be a quality of the human being that has the capacity for that, and some just don't.
Yeah. Yeah. I always say that it's like, some people do change, right?
Hmm.
And some people don't, right? So you can't, your own opportunity for healing can't just be hedged on a, well, I hope they change, you know?
Yes, but for the person watching this, there is that concept, but there's also, I tell people, or I would tell clients, is that you live with these people for 2 decades. You know these folks very well when it comes to
Yeah.
the abusive parent. Is I think that a big piece of healing is when we stop holding out hope for that change.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? Because that can really run us and prevent us from going into the grief space. That can really run
Mm.
us in terms of, it also really messes with our intimate relationships.
Yeah.
So if inner children are always focused on the potential of an abuser changing. So if we can dismantle that potential, I'm not saying, if my mom called me and said I've been going to AA for a year and I would love to have a conversation, I'd be blown away. It's a miracle. You know what I mean? I would want to see if she really has changed. I'm not saying it's an impossibility, but I am saying I'm 48 years old. I've known my mom for a long time. Like you could see the patterns. And there's a difference, though, in terms of holding out hope and becoming more real.
That's so profound, because it also feels like it goes against what a lot of like online spirituality that you see, right, which is all based around sort of garnishing this idea of hope, right?
Mm-hmm.
Healing is letting go of difficult emotions and, coming back to the hope that they could be who they are, right? And what you're saying and what I heard, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but
Mm-hmm.
is that true healing starts not when you say not necessarily when you say I'm never going to have a relationship with them again, but you let go of that childlike hope
Yeah.
that they might change, and you live your life from that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is hard because now we have to grieve the parent that we had. Now we have
Yeah.
to grieve the childhood that we needed but didn't get. You know what I
Mm.
mean? But I think that all childhood trauma survivors are a little bit codependent. We
Yeah.
all have some version of that in that way. And in my case, when I was in that group that I mentioned years ago, the first year is I would try to get my mom sober. I was like
Mm.
in that very much, I call it aggressive codependency,
Yeah.
where in some childhood trauma survivors, like they're trying to beat somebody into submission to get healthy,
Yeah.
but they're not looking at that they have maybe nothing to work with.
Yeah.
Or they're not even looking at them maybe even being a little bit abusive themselves by trying to get somebody to change. But everybody, I think, for childhood trauma needs an experience to be able to accept their own truth and be able to tell the truth about what it was like. But a wounded inner child is going to avoid or try to avoid the grief and the rage and all those feelings by holding out hope that their tragically codependent mom is going to leave their narcissistic dad, or vice versa. If you just want to flip those genders, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's stuff is, but I do find that there's a phenomenon that I think that once people get real about an abusive person in their life, and most growth and empowerment and change, I think, comes from not letting or helping their inner child not have that magical thinking on hope.
Mm. There's this at Christmas time at NACOA, the charity for children of alcoholics, we experience on the helpline something that we call the Christmas phenomenon, which is the phone lines at Christmas, at the start of Christmas, drop off a cliff and go really quiet. And then what they do is a couple of days into the holidays, they then skyrocket beyond what they were. And what we see is that they have this magical, Christmas brings this magical hope that maybe things will change. Maybe Christmas will make things different,
Right.
And then we see that there's this crash after that hope where it
Do you mean
turns out it's not.
because of the Christmas, and this is heartbreaking, and I love that you brought that up, is that the inner child isn't bad for having that magical thinking. That's what has kept us surviving.
Yeah.
When we're 10 or 12 or 15, like when we're getting abused, to think magically about the abuser helps us, because we'd be really kind of screwed if we were just drowning in the feelings of how bad it was.
Yeah.
But are you suggesting that someone might kind of say, oh, actually, let's have Uncle Frank here for Christmas because it's Christmas and we want to experience that, or we want to have dad or mom. And the boundaries go away, or the limit
Yeah,
goes
yeah.
away. And now all of a sudden it's Christmas Day and mom or dad is drunk on the floor and creating havoc or whatever. And now the calls
And
come back.
and everything's exactly as it always was, and the
Yeah,
magic of Christmas didn't
sure.
work. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. You can see how that comes about, right?
right. It's also why when folks withdraw that the holidays are the worst time,
Mm.
because it's the holidays is when the inner child goes, was it that bad? Am I awful for not talking to my own father on Christmas? I must be a POS.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? This is where the battle between what we call the inner adult and the inner child. The inner adult is like, in the summer, I can't deal with my parent anymore. I have to set limits or boundaries, whether it's alcoholism or not. You know, we were having a very alcoholic
yeah,
focused conversation here. Um, let's say they set those limits in the summer. Do you know what I mean? And they decide to go low contact or no contact, and they set boundaries. Now begins like almost the hardest part of their recovery is dealing with the guilt and shame of doing that while trying to keep themselves safe. And then
yeah,
the holidays roll around, or Thanksgiving in the US rolls around.
yeah,
Hard.
yeah,
Birthdays, that kind of a thing. And also depending on how the parent is responding to low or no contact, you know, like dropping off packages, showing up at their work, calling old lovers to try to get info from their child, you know, like that stuff.
that's
And there we're back to the definition of toxicity.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
That brings me on to something I'd like to explore if we can.
sure.
Firstly, let me ask this question. You might not be able to answer it properly. Do you think there is, or have you seen any statistics or anything? I interviewed somebody recently that said, from their research, there is no statistics to suggest that can actually suggest that it is on the rise. But you might tell me different. He was UK based. Is there any statistics or anything you see in your work that suggests that family estrangement is on the rise?
Great question. I think that there is a study here in the US that I can't name it. There could be, and this is vague, but people have referenced a study. And for me, I can't quite suss out because it's not new to me.
Yeah,
You know, I experienced it in the late 90s. It was part of a therapeutic intervention because many of us in that group, we would take two steps forward in trying to feel better about ourselves. And then we would go to Thanksgiving.
yeah,
And then we were caught up in drama, anything from a parent taking out like credit cards in our name.
yeah.
You know what I mean? It's not like we were just had bumpy conversations,
Hmm.
or it's just a lot of, or even the parent were like sort of saying, you need to stop that therapy because you're becoming brainwashed, like all kinds of stuff, right?
Yeah,
So it's not new. And it's also outside of the wellness sphere or therapy world or whatever. For hundreds of years, people have left family. Do you know what I mean? People have,
yeah,
I just, you know, like it's just even in prior many generations, do you know what I mean? Like it's not a new phenomenon. I personally think, though, that what with social media, which has good qualities and bad qualities for anything, I think it's simply talked about more.
hmm,
And I think people are recognizing that they do have the ability to protect themselves in that way. You know, I do want to sort of say honestly that in both camps there can be outliers. Remember what I said about team A, team B.
yeah,
There
yeah.
can be adult children who have their own mental health problems
Of
that
course.
maybe they might be little bit narcissistic, or they might be really immature or whatever, and they go no contact for maybe frivolous reasons. I personally haven't had any clients who have done that, but I'm just saying it is possible.
Mm,
The same way that it's possible for estranged parents to actually be open and workable to something. Do you know what I mean? So it's just like
yeah,
it's a very juxtaposed, polarized thing. And I think
yeah.
we'd be remiss if we were just like all adult children are 100% perfectly in the right and all estranged parents are
Of
perfect.
course.
There's going to be different cases in each one's. I personally don't like it when adult children, I don't like it when either party describes each other as a narc. Because
Yeah.
I've had people show up in my comments who are estranged parents, and they're like, "What about if my son's a narkety,
Yeah.
narc face?" You know what I mean? Like, I just don't.
Yeah.
There's just a lot. It just tells you there can be unwell people in both sides.
Yeah.
But at the same time, too, is like there are a lot of estranged parents that can either be toxic, or they can be emotionally immature and they don't quite get any of this stuff.
Yeah.
And they're with adult children, they can be on a path. It's like simply, and what's sad about the adult child, both worlds, is like a 35-year-old new mom who has gone no contact. They just want to be able to bring their children to grandma's house and have that not be a screaming dramatic
Mm.
fest or a neurotic experience in cleanliness or
Mm-hmm.
whatever is going on there, you know, or to have one. They don't want their child to witness their mother berate their father, the grandfather at
Yeah.
Target or something like that. You know what I'm trying to say? They just don't
Yeah.
want to have the experience. And then when they try to get it addressed, it's like, those are not problems. That's who we are. I don't know what your
Yeah.
problem is. So
Yeah.
it's there are levels of complexity, but I
Yeah.
would
Of
say for
course.
the majority of it is that when adult children talk about these things, I tend to believe them because it's sort of weird in this way. And again, this could be my bias, is those adult children are the ones kind of doing work.
Yeah.
You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like,
They're the ones that have come to you willing to look at it.
this drives me crazy. Is there's been accusations against content creators like me or my work or whatever, where an estranged parent is very aggressive in saying, well, why don't you just do family therapy and actually help these things going on? And I kind of want to say, you want family therapy now. Now you
Yeah.
want family therapy. And I don't
Yeah.
I don't mean to say like, oh, I'm dangling something on a carrot stick or something like that. I'm just pointing out, like, so the shit has really hit the fan in your life, and now you're mad at me for not providing family therapy, when most likely your child has been trying to get through to you for decades about stuff, maybe
Yeah.
about your reactions, maybe about your marriage or whatever. So I feels very hypocritical
Yeah.
to say, oh, I see that you're not doing family therapy, you're selling courses on helping people kind of withdraw.
Yeah.
Isn't that convenient,
Yeah.
kind of a thing. So it's just like, there's the other piece for estranged parents, and I know I'm probably feels like I'm ragging on them right now, is that you have the same access to a whole world of mental health help. This
Yeah.
phenomenon, as a human species, we've never had. Maybe we have too much, whatever, but you have the same exact resources that your child has. You could look at your own
Yeah.
childhood. You could look at your responding versus reactions. You could look
Yeah.
at your attachment issues. You could look at dissociation. You could look at your feelings. Go look up a feeling wheel. And again, I'm not trying to be facetious here, but
Yeah.
everyone has the same knowledge. Who is using it, though?
Yeah.
But also, don't create a narrative that knowledge is the problem, because that's convenience for you.
Yeah.
Like, oh, my adult kid is all about attachments and feeling wheels. I know, you know what I mean? Like, why can't we just have a meal without bringing any of that stuff up?
Yeah. 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 And how have you managed to reach, by the way, you're saying all of that, and now you've reached a place where you think that a video of mine on social media is the reason that they've gone no contact,
Yep.
right? Why don't you spend a bit of time looking at why you're blaming some random person who's making videos on the internet?
But I have to say, for that estranged parent, if they're probably not, if they, but if they ever find this video or whatever, I gently want to say that you're very much outing yourself, and you're telling a longer story about yourself. Is if you want to show up on one of my videos and attack me and attack the ideas and the concepts about why your child has gone no contact, because it spells out two things. You're sort of saying that your child has been brainwashed, but in that same conversation, that your child has no thought process of their own.
Yeah.
And thirdly, is that you're looking to blame somebody about your current situation, and that tells me a lot about you.
Yeah.
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 It tells me
Yeah.
a lot about you,
Yeah.
unfortunately. You know, like,
Yeah.
I hate to say it, but you know what I mean? Like, there are estranged parents who don't do that.
Yeah.
Lots of them are, unfortunately. The other side of this thing is, I don't know where I'm rambling here and stuff like that, is like, ideally, around the issue of no contact, is I believe that estranged parents should know, because I would feel crazy if my child went no contact and I didn't know, left second guessing, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But what I also kind of want to say there is that for them, if I was doing, if I was doing therapy or something like that with estranged parents, I would be really looking at, were there times in your child's life that they may have tried to tell you?
Yeah.
Like, did they try to tell you that their step parent wasn't safe years ago? Did they try to connect with you in a certain way, and that just never really worked out? And that might
Mm-hmm.
be hard for them to answer through memory gaps, but that's probably one of the more heartbreaking issues for me, is like when parents don't really kind of know. I try to encourage people to kind of say it, but if that person is just like, I've been saying it for years, and I'm like, then I get it. You don't, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is it seems to be the case in many respects as well. There's one more thing I want to explore. I know
Yeah, sure.
we're going quite a lot with time here. Because I quite like this question. What do
Mhm.
you think the wellness world often gets wrong about healing from dysfunctional family systems or toxic family systems?
Yeah. Um, there are amazing coaches out there. There are terrible coaches. There are amazing therapists out there. There are terrible therapists out there. Like, it's when we think about the wellness world, it's hard to just kind of pin that down to one vibe, you know. Um, and the question is, what do I think that they maybe get wrong about it?
Yeah. When you look online, are there any sort of trends or narratives that you're seeing that?
I don't. What I have a problem with is the wellness world. It seems like to me it's been influxed with, like, anybody who's had an epiphany in their life is now can be a coach.
Yeah.
Do you know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
I prefer if they get some clinical training. But again, there are great coaches with life experience. There are not so ones. But I just don't like the opportunities that arise, and it seems like for people, like, why work a job when I can just get an Instagram account, build that up with clever things to say, and then do coaching with people, but I really don't really know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So I don't.
Yeah.
It's just like, we all probably can spot it for kind of maybe what is or not. But the other thing, I don't know if this happens to you. This might be my own childhood trauma, but I tend to really loathe middlemen.
Yeah.
Just don't like them. And a lot of there's these companies that reach out to me. They're like conglomerate of like courses.
Yeah.
So they'll reach out to me. They'll say, like, one of our clients is Gabor Mate, and we'd
Yeah.
love to have a discussion with you about your work. In other words, a middleman who's just sort of saying, you could host your courses here, and then we'll split it 50-50.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm sort of saying to the listener is, think about the content. Think about this person on the screen in front of you a little bit,
Yeah.
in a way of like, what are they truly offering?
Yeah.
Are they regurgitating ideas that maybe aren't theirs? Are they offering something? If it's easy, it's probably not worth it.
Yeah.
Or even maybe a little bit damaging to you. Just kind of
Yeah.
like, come to Costa Rica and sort of have our spiritual experience of letting go of the abusive parent.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm making stuff up, but I find that if
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
if it's just that easy, like, in a way, like, I'm sitting of this kind of watching a lot of this stuff, going, ugh. Because I was in a 3.5 year group therapy where every session was really hard to show up to.
Yeah.
Like, there was a lot of time in halls of AA, like being pissed off or growing pains. There was a lot of time in a group therapy where it's like we were doing a lot of cathartic, messy work.
Yeah.
You're wrestling out of this stuff.
Mm.
The work that I do in my membership is really about helping people reparent the inner child and have insight. But I'm crystal clear that it's not therapy. And I
Yeah.
encourage them to find a therapist, and I give them specific resources sort of on that, because I think that also the word healing gets thrown around. I'm probably guilty of it myself, but I think people not, and I'm not giving people enough credit here, but I think that people can kind of say, "Oh, I had an epiphany or I have some insight that was so healing."
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I think healing is when you can treat your partner very differently, when you can treat yourself very differently,
Yeah.
when you can be in the world in a very different way that's consistent. Like I was in rough shape. I was pretty miserable when I woke up. Like I was not a good time. I was really reactive.
Yeah.
I thought the world was really like against me. It was not pretty, you know.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that answers, but the healing world is like this lots of bypassing, spiritual bypassing, lots of it's just like where um, I've seen a bunch of coaches on TikTok that just repeat what people like you and I sort of say as their own,
Yeah.
and that's tricky. Just like repeating what Dr. Ramani says, or not. One thing really, I tend to not get tripped up on this because it's not good for me. But one person was just like, I forget who said it, and then repeated the exact thing that I said in a clip with somebody, or vice versa, and it's just
Yeah.
like that's
Yeah.
like it would have been so easy if you just tag the person or name the source. So a lot of not naming sources or whatever. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but
Yeah, no, that probably, I think that's one of my biggest. Sometimes I'll see, and it could be even nothing to do with me, right? But sometimes I'll see a piece of content online, and then a couple of days later, I'll see somebody else doing that piece of content, but as if
I
they're
know,
just doing.
I
And
know.
sometimes it's even just a funny clip, right? They're just
Right.
repeating like
Yeah.
somebody else's funny skit. But I just think to myself, I feel shame in my body when I see it because I just think I can't imagine somebody watching something that I've just done online and thinking he's copied this from over here, right? It makes me die, and I couldn't bring myself to do it. But I mean,
Yeah.
I guess that's the landscape that we're in nowadays, right?
But it's also, but then sort of having hundreds of people do it that they don't even know who the original source is anymore.
Yeah, well, that's what happens, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's what happens.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep. There was one other piece about, that I wanted to, couple things is we talked a lot about like no contact and estrangement. And I like talking about it, but I really want to be crystal clear to people that it's not what my work is truly about. You know what I mean? Like we work in these groups. It's not like you show up to this group and there's immediately like a conversation about going no contact or whatever. It's only a part that maybe 50% of my clients might have considered, and then I'm available to have that conversation with them. Like
yeah,
in some ways, people this argument is related to that is for those people who do go low or no contact. I want to kind of remind them that that's a beginning
mm,
of you really working on yourself, because of I really believe that the mechanism around low or no contact is to get safety.
mm,
And for some people that's about working on yourselves, that maybe one day you can get to a place to be involved in your family on a different level.
yeah,
Like in other words, no contact does not have to be forever. There are all different sort of shapes and sizes about it. For some people, their family is so egregious that they can feel like they can never really be safe, and I totally get that. The other thing is that the work that I do is about healing to a point that I want to be clear how I say this is about healing to a point that if you choose to engage with your family, you don't lose your truth. They can stay
mm,
the same. And you might have limited, maybe you go to Thanksgiving dessert or something like that. And there, so I just want to be that there's all different types, but at the heart of it is that the estrangement piece and going no contact and the toxic family stuff is about, I think, getting people space for them to become more empowered, for them to become who they are outside of all that kind of toxicity or whatever. And then they have the choice to do that. This is the most important piece, is that eventually you lose interest in the dynamics, in the toxicity. You lose interest in your history. Like, it's, in other words, I don't toss and turn at night about what my mother did when I was 12. You know, I just sort of see her as she's in an unfortunate place in her life that she's never really been able to get it. But it's not like I'm writhing in resentment or anger or fear, because it's sort of, the work is about releasing all that. But I still don't consider my mom to have a safe relationship with.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Because it's like, I don't, why would I? It's like, if my neighbor was a really drunk lady with really poor boundaries, I wouldn't be hanging out with her either. I know that that sounds cold, but I don't wish my mother ill, and I can even love her from afar. But, you know, there's this, it's a complex world that isn't just about, you're bad, I'm out.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
And that's really important, because I think that if you're not careful, that's what people see, and that's what they think you're saying. You know, they're bad, they're out.
That also might be what they're looking for. Do you know what I mean? They might be looking for to catch me in that. You know, just because, like, there's a lot of, you know, in your content, you might have comments that are like, "Well, I noticed you didn't talk about this," and it's sort of like, because I was talking about this, I'm not, you know, one thing. I'm not making a grand statement about everything under the sun.
Yeah.
You know, so it's just sort of like, you know, like, in other words, coming back to that estranged parent is just kind of like, I noticed you don't do family therapy. You know what I mean? It's just like, I'm not opposed to family therapy. I think it works better when everyone wants to actually do work. But you know what I mean? But just because I'm not talking about it, it's like, you've found a gotcha moment in there, you know?
Yeah. When they're finding the gotcha moments, you can, you know, they're looking for them, like you said, you know, they're looking for it. And that's a classic, that one, when they, you know, I notice you're not talking about this, and you're like, it's because I'm talking about this.
But, you know,
why would I?
In a good way. I think that kind of stuff is also, I've seen that stuff kind of die down. It was really initially in the like in the last like 3 or 4 years that I haven't been attacked by parents in the way that I was used to. Maybe because I've made myself more clear. Maybe it's because I've made a video recently for them that's kind of like, here's what you might be hearing, as opposed to what your child is saying. So it's not like every day there's this, you know, in other words, I don't really see this. I think that most estranged parents are struggling, and hopefully they're looking at resources that aren't just enabling them, you know? But I think that a lot of them are kind of struggling, but I'm not as attacked the way that I used to be, or maybe I'm not paying attention to the comments, or maybe they've given up. But I do still see a sentiment that social media influencers are ripping apart the family, when I just kind of want to sort of say, you might want to take a look at your own family instead of make that statement about what, you know.
Yeah, it's a good point. Patrick, I've loved this, mate. It says I was really excited today, actually, to speak to you, to have this conversation, because we're clearly very aligned, and we not really interacted with each other before this, so it's been super nice, man. And
before you go, I didn't get a chance to ask you a question. I got one question for you. Like, can you tell me about, in your work, how are people showing up in the terms of the toxic family or this stuff? Like, what do you see? What are they struggling with? How are you working with them?
So I do a lot of what I do is inner child work with like through a somatic lens more than anything. So just trying to work on like what's there and what's in the body. And I guess, like, to talk about themes that I see, a lot of women, I find, start off with an inner child that's young and sad, and then with a little bit of work end up with a teenager that's really angry. So I find a lot of them have never been able to have their anger. So they find having anger to be quite freeing, because they've felt like they've never been able to have it.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So I feel
Right.
like there's a lot, and that's, I say that specifically for women. I think there's probably a truth in it for men as well. But I think if you look societally, that I would say societally, teenage girls are not allowed their anger in the way that
Right.
teenage boys perhaps are, right?
Very
So
true.
so they don't get that. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that I think what I'm seeing is that a lot of people want truth. I get a lot of the like scapegoats and truth seekers that come to me,
Mm-hmm.
the ones that have had a lifetime of really actually being closer to the truth than anybody around them in their systems that they've existed in.
Well said. Yeah.
And so they find the truth healing. And I heard a lot like, and I guess that's, I'd imagine that's a big part of what draws people to you because what I've heard a lot when you spoke today is you're willing to land at the truth. You're willing to land at the truth, even if it's like, even if that means taking something that I've said and not just going, yeah, definitely agree with that, but going, okay, let's just have a look at that and let's unpack that a bit
Mm-hmm.
more, And I think there's real wealth in just unpacking the truth and then letting people know that actually, yeah, that truth makes sense,
Mm-hmm.
because I think one of the trends I'm seeing here, just to speak about that a bit more, is that the media are talking more about estrangement
Mm-hmm.
in the UK,
Mm-hmm.
but when they talk about it, it's always through the lens of the parent, the abandoned parent
Sure.
who's been abandoned by this new generation of adult children who are just cutting their parents off willy nilly.
Yep. Same.
That's how it's being reported here.
Same here, and it makes me think about like a patriarchal kind of view, about like there was an article that I was interviewed for the New York Times a year ago, and it
Hmm.
was kind of a both sides issue, but it was really kind of spelling out how the parents are suffering and negating and not even really fully disclosing what the children were kind of going through. So there is very similar things, and even articles that had kind of copied and pasted that sentiment in other countries around the world with a similar vibe.
Yeah. And one of the trail of thoughts that I'm sort of starting to be on, or maybe I'm already, quite on, is that I actually think that the societal systems that we exist in reflect the toxic family systems that we're talking about today. So I believe that
Sure.
the
Yeah.
the societal system, so like here in the UK, the government is sort of ran by the equivalent of a toxic parent, and then
Sure.
society reflects the roles that we often see within a dysfunctional family system. So I sort of use the
Mm-hmm.
example of when we went into the pandemic, you had the sort of hero golden children who were just like, just follow the rules, like do everything that you're told, right? And let's take away for a minute whatever people's views are of what COVID was or is or whatever. But you have the golden children who don't look anywhere outside, do what you're told and be a good person.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have like the scapegoat ones who are a little bit more like, well, hang on a minute, this is, I'm not sure about what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have a tendency to go too far, to, go the other way and go, I'm not going to do anything they say, And
Yeah.
I think that, like, I don't know how much sense I'm making here, but I
No,
feel like,
you're making perfect sense, and I think about that a lot in a way that you could simply look at how politics and government can be extremely dramatic,
mm,
victim, rescuer, perpetrator, much like the
yeah,
toxic parent. Those people are ruining our lives, and I'm the only one that can save you from those people ruining our lives. It's a
yeah,
very powerful thing that happens inside and outside the home. So
yeah,
there's all kinds of toxic family traits in our society. It's
yeah,
just like, even simply how we view people who are poor or disabled or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Like there's there's still, even to catch ourselves, even I still have this like, oh, come on. You know what I mean? I'm like, then I have to
Yeah.
question, where does that come from? Where does that lack of sensitivity come from? And it's like, you look at the town I grew up in.
Yeah.
If you were poor or had a disability, you were trying to win over somebody or comp on something. You know, these societies tend to really like pig pile on vulnerability or
Yeah.
sensitivity.
Yeah. And I feel like, you know, a child that lives at home with a parent who is toxic, right? A 5-year-old child, it's not safe for them to admit that their parent is toxic, right? Because they wouldn't be
Yeah.
able to live with it at
And they
5,
don't
right?
have
So
that language. And then how are they going to
yeah,
feel if they know that too? You know?
yeah. What does that do to their world if all of a sudden
Yeah.
they admit to themselves that they're living with a parent that doesn't love them, right? At 5 years old. And I think that's just, and then so, you know, they may grow up to start to resent their sibling because it's easier to resent the sibling who's
You get
getting
it.
in trouble, getting
Yeah.
in trouble at school than it is to, right?
Yeah.
And I see that in society. I think that happens. I think we go, oh my God, you know, if I was to admit that I live in an abusive system and the very government that's supposed to be supporting me is actually toxic and like only seems to really
Absolutely.
care about themselves. So let me, you know, let me get pissed off with immigration, or let me get pissed off with homeless people, right? Let me scapegoat somebody else because it's too painful to look at the fact that I feel powerless over what is actually the problem.
I love what you just said, because when we look at, like in the toxic family system, the person who is either really in pain or needs more resources, like say the marginalized in society, the immigrant, or someone who's struggling socioeconomically, struggling racially, being in a certain dominated, you know what I mean, like just simply racism, is like in the family, we will say to, you're an asshole for bringing up the racial issue or the
Yeah,
poverty issue or whatever. And that is a distraction from looking at what you know what I mean? Like, so here in the
yeah,
US, we have a very much like now anti-immigrant sentiment, a lot of racism. Well, that's not new, but you know what I mean? Like, people are
yeah,
starting to battle each other more about it because it's a convenient distraction from what's going on up top.
yeah,
Like, if a toxic parent is like, if I can pin one child against the other, I don't believe that this is a conscious thought. If I can pin my golden child against my scapegoated child, then they're not going to pay attention to what I'm really doing, pulling the strings.
yeah, yeah.
You
And
know?
like you can see that clearly reflected at government level, right?
Right.
But arguably, I would argue, the cynic in me would argue, way more consciously when we're looking at
Yes.
government. We could say it. We
Yeah.
could say it more
Right.
confident that it's quite conscious at a government level, when
Yeah.
maybe it's a subconscious thing that's going on within the family. But the more I look at it, the more I go, this is a societal, this whole system,
Yeah.
toxic system, power base. You know, because I think that whenever there is a high imbalance of power, yeah, and the person that has the lesser of the imbalance believes they can't escape it, then it's a breeding ground
Yeah.
for abuse, right?
Also, where did these politicians learn how to be that way?
Yeah,
Where did this, in America, we have a lot of highly on in both parties. You know, I'm not just like naming one party, although one more than others, but highly toxic, divisive people. I'm not even talking about Trump. I'm just talking about people like who are in that part. Like, they're just characters. And I'm just kind of psychologically wondering, like, what was it like to be a 12-year-old at your kitchen table?
yeah,
What were the discussions like? Do you know what I mean? Like, how did you learn to be that demeaning or dramatic? Or do you know what I mean? Because it's like sometimes that can just be in the water thread of the family system genetically.
yeah,
But I really think about, like, where did you learn to create such oppositional drama to make yourself look good?
yeah.
And I think that they might have learned from some masters of their family system.
Exactly.
You
Yeah,
know, very
yeah,
exploitive, intrusive people. You know, so.
yeah,
And then coming full circle, what would it be like to do therapy with them and trying to get them to see that?
yeah, yeah.
My
Exactly.
dad was amazing. He
Yeah,
built several companies. he helped that town so much. I'm offended.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Oh, Patrick, this has been honestly. I'm glad you asked those couple of questions as well because it took us off on yeah, that's right up my street. That is talking about that kind of stuff. We could go on. We could go on, and I've said it to a few guests, but I'll say it to you as well. I'd love to get you back on at some point.
Absolutely.
I feel like this is the warm up, and then we can
Cool.
really dive in. We can maybe bring some topical discussions, and because you're a very you have a very grounding aura.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, it's very noticeable. I've noticed it very early on in the conversation with you. It's like, wow, I feel
Yeah.
very relaxed and I feel
Cool.
very safe. So
Same. You're
yeah.
wonderful to talk to. Just like, and I kind of intuited that just from like watching your reels. It's just like sort of like just kind of very much just like down homey as if we were having, I appreciate more conversations that are like that as if we were just having a coffee, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like after something. So it's really, really cool. Yeah. You're doing amazing work, and lastly is I've also seen you do work with a lot of men. Is that right?
I run a men's group.
Men's
Yeah,
group?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, so we've been doing that it'll be 4 years in November now,
Mm-hmm.
since we started that. Yeah. So yeah, it's a big passion of mine, yeah.
Love that you do that because it's sort of in my world, most of my audience is female, and that was true both on social media as well as in my practice. And I love working with men. I just wish that more men were more accessible to be able to. So I just love that you're doing that. You
Yeah,
know.
you know what's incredible is that my online following is predominantly women.
Mm-hmm.
And we sort of joke a little bit about it because Uncommon Man, which is the men's event that I run, there's a high percentage of them that get sent there by a wife that follows me online. So like all is not lost because
Yes.
we go
Right.
around at the beginning and we're like, if you're new, just let us know like what's brought you here. And so many of them are like, hi, I'm so and so, and my wife follows you online and says that I should come here, and we're like, oh, welcome. That's how most of us get here. So yeah,
But they came. But
exactly.
it's like it's
Yeah,
not the difference is like it's fantastic. Like because
yeah,
it's in a way that where we could probably have another whole podcast about this, but growing up as a boy, I was not taught. I learned from women. I learned from therapy. I learned from being in a went from a very conservative town to a very progressive. I had to be taught to be able to discuss feelings and be open to things. But in the town that I grew up in, therapy, men's group, are you kidding me? Just
yeah,
like all that stuff. It's hard. It's hard for men because it's sort of like concrete rules
yeah.
that something bad's going to happen if you do stuff like this.
Yeah, and it comes to that emotional intimacy piece that we were talking about at the beginning. I grew up so until I ran the men's event. We only started that, like I say, 4 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I knew how to let you know that I loved you as a man by saying if you have a fight, I'll join in and back you, yeah. But that was it. I
Right.
didn't know how to like let a man care for me, or I didn't know how to care for another man. And
Right.
I always sort of joked I feel much more comfortable in a room full of women
Yeah.
because I felt more safe there. Like I knew what to do with
Mm-hmm.
men. Men I realized scare me, and when I'm
Yeah.
scared, I go into pretending that I'm really tough and I'm not scared of anything. And it is
Right.
pretending, right? Because I'm terrified around men.
Total
So
pretending. Yeah.
to get to that place, and it happened gradually in the men's group because I started it with two guys. And so we sort of lead the sessions, and for 2 years I led the sessions. And
Yeah.
I didn't do any of it because I didn't, I was hiding as the leader of the group. And
Yeah.
so, I
Mm-hmm.
slowly over time was able to open myself up, and we do a lot of the group stuff there, and we do some of the breathwork stuff as well. So it's
Very cool. I was
yeah, it's
I
good
was
work.
blessed to have three men in the group that I was in the late '90s, and it was the first time I felt very in a similar way. I felt very uncomfortable around men. Men only get, I think, one blueprint, and that's to be like not a hug, but pats on the back, and then just kind of like
Yeah,
calling each other man and buddy, and not there's no intimacy there. But so it's amazing that to create that and experience that because it's really breaking rules.
yeah, yeah, and I think the 12 steps helped with that as well. That like leaned me into it, because you're in a
Sure.
room with a lot of men sort of speaking openly as well. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it's important.
Right. Wonderful chatting with you. We'll do it again. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah.
I'm going to put everywhere that people can find you, all the links to all of your stuff below, and just a massive thank you, really.
Thanks for having me. Thanks.
Thank you. I did tell you it would be dysfunctional, so thank you for sticking around till the end here. And if you have enjoyed this podcast, then please help me to grow Dysfunctional by sharing with your friends on social media. You can find me at Josh_FFW. And then wherever you're listening to this or watching this, please make sure that you've liked and subscribed, left us a 5-star review and a comment if your platform allows it. And I'll see you on the next one.